Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar, Jamie Janover has long been interested in the intersection of science and all things considered philosophical and spiritual. After years of investigating the subject, when he first came across Nassim Haramein, many of whom you will recognize the name of, lecturing at a music festival, the dots connected. He has been delving ever deeper into the world of unified physics and ancient cultures through the lens of Nassim Haramein and other theories ever since, sharing resonant information in multimedia presentations he delivers while on tour as a musician. Taught by Nassim Haramein how to deliver extensive presentations on his unified field theory, Jamie has gone on to become an official ambassador for the Resonance Science Foundation. He is also a member of the faculty of their online Resonance Academy and co-hosts the Ancient Origins section of the Academy's core course, as well as hosting his own online course in the Resonance Academy called Ancient Egypt Revisited. So an extensive interview for, again, a very exciting person that we're happy to be able to have on. So if we got Jamie already and queued up, let's get Jamie in here. And
there he is.
Jamie, welcome.
How you doing?
How's it going?
Doing good, man. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for doing this. As always, I appreciate you very much, Neil, for doing these kinds of things and, sticking your neck out. Some of this stuff is on the edge. And so, it takes some bravery, and I applaud you for going for it. And because we need to go for it right now, obviously, right?
Yeah, there's no holding back at this point. There never really was, right? But now all the stops are being pulled out, and it's kind of game time for everybody. So we just got to go full throttle with what we believe and our mission, really.
Well, there's a lot of people out there, and they're not all doing what you're doing. So I'm just, again, giving you props for really, you're pushing it farther than most humans in terms of like connecting dots and getting all these folks onto this 5-day long thing. Like, it's not simple. It's not easy. I've done some stuff like this and produced things, and what Neil's doing, you guys, is very ornate and involves a lot of communication very often, multiple times with every single person and people you don't see. So thank you again, for like including me in this, because it's really an honor, especially like speaking right after Brad, because we were in Peru together, and so just to connect these threads and the places around the world and the timeline, because it's very complex. Stuff is way more complex than we were told in school. Like infinitely more complex. And a lot of the stuff we were taught even a few decades ago was completely ridiculous. Some of it was so wrong. And now we have to like correct the record so that the kids growing up right now can go, Mom, the slaves didn't build the pyramids, right? And she's like, what are you talking about? I took that in school. And the kids are like, oh, Mom, So yeah, I just feel like it's good to be a part of that movement of making things correct that were incorrect. And as we have new information, we should be able to update the textbooks really quickly. And I feel like that doesn't happen that quickly. And there shouldn't be textbooks, right? Like we like basically get rid of the old textbooks because we have to update them. And then within a very short amount of time, we're like, oh, we have to update that again. So we could probably just stop chopping down trees at this point and just give the kids the app update that's like, yeah, NASA's got a new update. Here's the new planet. Here's the new astronomics that we just discovered and all this stuff. So
yeah, we operate very inefficiently in the world, because of the way that we handle our resources. Even oil companies, they invest in 30 years loans in order to have pipelines built. So for those 30 years, they don't want to invest in anything that will take away from petrol, right? So we put all of our energy and our focus into wrong places. I know you've been speaking for a while about the origins of humanity and rewriting the textbooks, re-educating the public. Why don't you get into maybe talking about your history a little bit and how you came into this? Because what I truly love about your information isn't, I love everything you do in Nassim Haramein, but I love the connection you make with ancient sites and structures and how that is advanced, basically quantum physics and geometry that we're only now rediscovering. So maybe you can start off by taking us into that world.
Yeah, that's a tall order in that you're dealing with unified field theory, which for those who are not super familiar is you know, a physics theory that describes everything in the universe, right? From infinitely large to infinitely small, so that no matter what observation you make, it fits into that theory. And then there's the ancient civilization rewriting our history of where we came from. You know, most of us got taught the whole out of Africa hypothesis, and a very kind of linear, simple, easy to visualize migration of where humans started and then where they moved and what they did. And that is ridiculously simplified. And we now know that that theory is not only incorrect, but it's so many layers more complicated than we thought. We keep finding new species of hominid that we didn't even know. So the whole missing link story that we got is a missing chain, and it's more like fractal missing chains. So it's just so much more complex than we knew. Every time we think we know how stuff works, we come up with a whole nother layer of observations and theories that show that it was a little bit more complicated than we thought. And now the interesting thing that's happening is that the convergence of the physics and the geometry that was encoded by ancient civilizations is coming together, and it's actually simplifying and becoming easier. In other words, physics got so complicated, they kept having to add more and more complicated math onto a very complicated thing until they were like, yeah, this doesn't fit with this, but if we add more dimensions, then it might work. And then they don't define what a dimension is, and it gets super weird. And they start saying there's quantum weirdness, right? And nothing makes sense. And then the geometry comes in, and you go, hold on a second. What? There's structure to space. Oh, the study of structure in space is geometry. What is the geometry of space? That's a good question. That's where Nassim goes. And then long story short, the geometry of space-time was encoded by the ancient civilizations. Now, what that geometry is and how you derive that and why it makes sense as that geometry, that's kind of a long story. But you can basically say that tetrahedrons, the most foundational Platonic solid, is the seed of this geometry. And if you put 8 of them together pointing in, you get a perfectly balanced geometry called the cuboctahedron, right? The vector equilibrium. And 8 tetrahedrons pointing out, you get a star tetrahedron. And so anybody who's following this information is like, oh yeah, star tetrahedron. Oh yeah, vector equilibrium. Thank you, Buckminster Fuller. Oh yeah, the torus. That's the most foundational pattern of energy in the universe. And it's going around like this in different hemispheres, singularity in the center. There's a geometry to that. That fractally goes out infinitely bigger and infinitely smaller in a hollow fractal lattice structure that you could call an infinite tetrahedral array. And that geometry we find in ancient cultures all around the world, encoded in things like pyramids and all these different cultures, the flower of life symbol, the yin yang, the I Ching, all these calendrical systems that deal with 24 and hexagonal lattice structures, all these different traditions pointing towards the same basic seed set of information that is basically geometric information. So that doesn't seem like a coincidence, right? Like all the stuff that I was taught in high school, I'm like, okay, all right. And then it's like, wait, what? You think there's a certain amount of mass and you can't find it, so you invent a new type of matter that you have no evidence for whatsoever and just throw it into your equation and say, just give us billions of dollars. We're going to find this stuff called dark matter. Guess what? We've been looking for that for decades and spent hundreds of billions of dollars, and tens of thousands of PhDs have probably been given to people looking for dark matter. And it's missing, not because there's some mysterious type of matter that's not there. It's that they misinterpreted the energy that's in the space that's not empty. If you account for the amount of energy in the fabric of space at the quantum scale, then you don't need dark matter anymore. And the geometry and the ratios of how the universe is organizing itself in an infinite scale, past the universe to the multiverse, and past the atom, past the proton, past the Planck, which is the smallest vibration we can measure, Smaller than that goes infinitely small. All those scales have a very, very specific geometric ratio, and that is this new unified field scaling law that Nassim Haramein is about to publish. It's called, oh my gosh, I hope I can remember this off the top of my head. It's scale invariant unification in fields, particles, and something else. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head. I'm so sorry. But he has a brand new paper that's about to come out, and it's at resonantscience.org. And this is Nassim Haramein, the unified field theorist. And he's been writing papers that are getting closer and closer to this unification. And the next paper that's about to come out that he's been working on for quite some time is this next level, showing these scales and this ratio from the infinitely small to the infinitely large. And it all has to do with geometry, and all these ancient civilizations were encoding this geometry. That's gotta be beyond a coincidence. So then if it's not a coincidence, how did the ancient civilizations know the theorized geometry of the fabric of the vacuum according to a unified field theorist that only came up with this stuff since the scientific method was invented, which wasn't very long ago compared to the ancient civilizations, using modern technology, using very advanced ways of observing the universe, collating all that data and deriving a geometry and going, wait a minute, this geometry is very familiar. I've seen it all over the place. Yeah, it's because they knew about that geometry somehow. And then that raises the big, big questions, which I'm sure you guys have been talking about over these days, of maybe information came from off of our tetra. It wasn't part of the earth, right? It was extra tetra real information, which is what you would call the extraterrestrial information. So that's a theory, the ancient aliens theory of, yeah, they came down and they were like, okay, what's up? Here's the deal. Yeah, we're not God. We just happen to come from that star over there. And they're, oh, okay, we'll call you the sun gods. Okay, we'll be the sun gods. There's a lot of folks that said about the sun gods, and everybody that I was taught when I was a kid, oh, isn't that quaint that the ancient civilizations didn't really know what was going on, so they made up these myths and legends, right, about Zeus on the cloud, and then, you know, the ark flying in the sky. And if you didn't have terminology for advanced physics and technology back in the day, you would tell stories that sound very familiar to the stories that you see written in books like the Bible and ancient Hindu scriptures and the Vedas and all kinds of stuff, and the Mayan calendar. So all this to say that our entire story of where we came from, how the universe works, anthropology, archaeology, sociology, psychology, biophysics, epigenetics, you know, all these studies, all the ologies, if you want, are all having to be rewritten very rapidly because the new information is coming faster and faster as the technology gets better and better. And the more people like us go, blah, blah, blah. Did you find out about what that guy said over there? Because check out. And then somebody goes, no, I didn't see that. Thank you for telling me that. And so that's why I keep telling people like Neil and all the other people that are doing stuff like this, good work, because we need to advance that process of the feedback loop of the information so we can get as resonant and accurate and, you know, perfectly in tune with what's actually going on in the universe so that we can make really good decisions about how to proceed from here. Because so far, we've done some good things and we've done some things that we know are not so good. And so we should stop doing the not so good things right now, like yesterday, and change the way we do business on this planet. And for me, one of the big ones would be how we make energy so that we're not sending particulate into the atmosphere. That would be a nice way to start. And guess what? The good news is that the unified physics that Nassim Haramein and others around the world are writing is pointing towards what we call the unified field. You can see about that in the new Thrive film, for example, which is that the space-time itself is filled with energy. And if we learn how to get the energy out of the space, like we learned how to get electromagnetism out of the space, boy, that was convenient, right? Because I wouldn't be able to talk to you unless we realized there was an invisible field of energy that you can't see unless there's a lightning bolt. And then how are you going to get that into your devices? Boy, that's going to be complicated. Yeah, it was, but we figured it out. Now we're going to learn how to get energy to come right out of space. Instead of having to do combustion and burn stuff, we're going to get energy right from space-time. As soon as we do that, as soon as that is widely available, then there's no more scarcity whatsoever. Then we have unlimited amount of energy, unlimited amount of work or power or whatever you want to call it, which means a whole bunch of people that are literally slaving away right now don't have to slave away anymore. And we can decide how cool can we make everything? How beautiful can we make everything? How great art and music festivals can we do? And it's going to be about how much fun and comfort and love can we have happening, instead of how many resources can I hoard, because I have this misconception that there's a finite amount of energy in an infinite holographic field. That is not very intuitive. So that's why I've been on my own little personal mission to help folks like Nassim Haramein and Robert Edward Grant and Alan Green and all these other folks that are coming up with incredible insights about how the universe works. And it turns out that it's right on and it's super resonant, and that there's evidence for it all over the place. And at the same time, the powers that make the construction that we're in right now is the same big overarching system that ties in to all aspects of society. And what I'm trying to say is the educational system and the hierarchy of who gets what papers published when and how is messy, super messy. So if you don't have a PhD and you're a physicist who writes incredible equations, doesn't matter how good that math is, if you start saying stuff that is perceived by the mainstream to be totally left field, then people are like, oh, I don't know, that guy talks about extraterrestrials, I don't know about that math. And that's not logical either. Take the name off the paper, show the math to the physicist. Does this geometry work out? Because check it out, we can predict, because of this holographic field, you can look at the proton and predict stuff about the universe. You can look at the universe and predict stuff about the proton. And that's what Nassim is doing. He's looking at the proton very closely and how small those little Planck spherical units fit inside there, 10 to the 60 of them inside of a proton. And that ratio is giving him predictions like the temperature of the universe, the background radiation of the universe, the size of the universe. Nassim predicted those radius of the proton in 2012, and only a few months later it was reconfirmed by an accelerator in Switzerland, and it was within the margin of error of the experiment. And he doesn't have a particle accelerator. He was doing this out of theory, out of straight observation, out of straight geometry and ratios. And it has to do with the flower of life, three-dimensional sphere packing. So hold on a second, the ancient civilizations were encoding the geometry of the Planck spherical units that make the proton somehow? That's unbelievable. Like, how did that happen? That's why it's infinitely fascinating to go around the world and be like, wait a second, how did they make, standing there with Brian Forrester and Nassim Haramein and Brad Olson, looking at the stuff in Peru, for example, just being like, there is no way. They had vine ropes and they were pulling the stuff from the top of the mountain down into the valley and back up and building all this stuff, Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu and all over the place in Sacsayhuaman and Cusco. And then again, of course, the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is such a huge topic that I have an entire online course about it. And then stuff like in Mexico, going to see Teotihuacan and seeing the amount of alignment and the amount of coincidental, complete alignment with Giza and Teotihuacan. The area of the base of the Pyramid of the Sun and the Great Pyramid is only about 3% different. That could be a coincidence. Anything could be a coincidence. But when all these different things all point to the same place, then the chance of it being a coincidence goes way down. So this was my attempt to try to fit a 4-hour presentation into 20 minutes. How was that, Neil?